As you can imagine, it's not been a very easy morning for fans of Vice President Kamala Harris.
Yes, well, dedicated Democrat voters waited all night hoping to hear from their victorious candidate, but that wasn't to be. And Republican candidate Donald Trump swept to victory instead.
So when we do hear from Kamala Harris, we will let you know. Of course we will. But in the meantime, let's speak to political commentator, analyst Matt Goodwin. Matt, thank you very much indeed. Were you taken by surprise by this result?
No, I wasn't. I was writing much of the last year on Substack about why I thought Trump was going to win, why he was still pushing through that realignment that we've really been seeing since 2016. Not only was he remaining close to working class voters, which we've seen, to non-college educated voters, to small towns, but he was also expanding his coalition by reaching into Latino, Hispanic voters, African American voters, people in the suburbs. And so, for me, there's a real lesson here. You know, on the one hand, we've had two elections this year. You've had the Republicans, Democrats, you've had Conservatives, Labour here. We've got Conservatives in America leaning into this global political realignment and being rewarded handsomely. And you had the British Conservatives who were given the same realignment, the same dynamics in 2016, but basically refused to lean into that, treated many of the same groups of voters, I would argue, with contempt, didn't deliver on their promises, and were almost destroyed. So there's a really interesting comparison between the two here.
There's certainly a cultural element to the realignment, and one of the things that Trump and Vance have done so successfully is lean into that. There's also an economic element too, isn't there? And in the US, they're very much moved on. The Conservatives have very much moved on from this kind of free market liberalism, the idea that the economy is global and you shouldn't protect your own economy, and very much reversing that. But British Conservatives, and I would include Reform and all of the right-wing coalition in that, have not yet cottoned on to this idea.
Well, look at the fundamentals of this presidential election. The reason I was suspicious of the groupthink, the dominant narrative, if you like, was if you just looked at the top issue for American voters, it was the economy. If you then ask them, who do you trust most to manage the economy, it wasn't even close. Trump was a long way ahead of Kamala Harris. So that was the first indicator something was going to go on here that wasn't in line with where a lot of the groupthink was. Then Trump was giving those voters this idea of what he calls patriotic protectionism, which isn't to say, redistribution and left-wing economics. What he's saying, which I think all conservatives should say, is that the principle of national preference needs to run through everything in our economy, in housing, in how we distribute goods around our society. Namely, that if you're American, if you play by the rules, if you're from the working class, you should not be exploited by global big business corporations on one side and urban liberals on the other, who both, for different reasons, import cheap migrant labour, which undermines the working class. Now, that clearly resonated. What's remarkable about this presidential election result for me is the extent to which Trump hasn't only doubled down on the working class, but that working class has become much more racially diverse. I mean, I remember not so long ago, people on the liberal left, academics, the Rory Stewarts of the world, that kind of crowd, they used to say, well, demography is destiny, right? That was a narrative. The more that our societies become diverse, the more liberals will win. Well, this election has completely turned that on its head, because it's saying, well, if Conservatives deliver on this realignment, many minority voters want the same things as Conservatives. It's the same here, by the way, with British Indians, British Sikhs, British Hindus and so on. They don't want illegal migration. They don't want mass uncontrolled migration. They don't want their kids being taught that boys can become girls and girls can become boys. They don't want an economy that works for London and doesn't work for areas outside of the big capital cities and the university towns. The question is, are Conservatives in Britain, much like Conservatives in America, and I would argue Conservatives across much of Europe, are they actually going to listen to this? Is Kemi Babe not going to listen to this? Because, if she does, maybe there's a path back to recovery. I'm very sceptical. If they don't, they're toast.
I'm absolutely fascinated about what's going on among Gen Z, so the very young voters in the United States. We did see here in this country in the last election that there were quite a lot of young men who voted for the Reform Party. In the United States, differently, lots of young men voted for Donald Trump. Why is that?
So what's interesting, I have a column on Substack called Anonymous Zoomer. I'm never going to reveal who it is, but it's someone from Gen Z. And they were writing convincingly a couple of months out from this election as to why young Gen Z men were turning rapidly towards Trump. And what they were saying speaking for their generation, it's not that, they're rebelling against this kind of toxic masculinity thing. That, it's none of that. It's that for many of these young men, they haven't had a masculine figure in their lives. They're coming from broken families. They're in a more feminized society. They haven't had somebody that's projected strength and purpose and certainty in a way that Trump does. That was best symbolized by the fight, fight, fight moment. They're looking at this kind of woke culture that's telling them there's something inherently wrong with being a man. And I think it has all sort of come together. I mean, if you look at the exit poll data today, it looks like Trump has basically slashed the Democrat lead among Gen Z in half. Now, again, that flies in the face in the face of everything that liberals tell us, people on the left, because what they're saying is like politics is like a conveyor belt. The more graduates you have, the more young people you have coming through the system, everybody will move to the left. Well, that's not happening. And so not only have we witnessed, I think, the most impressive political comeback, probably one of the most impressive comebacks in the history of democracy, if you think about everything Trump has gone through, the court cases, the assassination attempts, the widespread condemnation and so on. But we've also seen a guy who's delivered what conservatives have really been unable to deliver for many decades, which is a movement that's much more in touch with young people. And that in itself is remarkable.
But not particularly young women, and this is what concerns me. Obviously, I am a small c conservative, but how do conservatives appeal to young women? What is the offer? Because, yes, of course, conservatives will be rejoicing that young men are now voting more that way, but actually the future of our societies is not that great if men and women become more and more polarised.
No, I agree with you, and young Zoomer university-educated women, college-educated women have moved so far to the left. Right, they are almost in a galaxy of their own. That, without doubt, I agree with you. But one of the messages from this election, if you're being ruthlessly pragmatic about this and you're just looking at it electorally, is, well, conservatives at the moment don't need young women in large numbers. I mean, that's the brutal reality of it. Trump has won the popular vote. He's won the Senate. He's won the presidency. He's probably going to win the House. And at the moment, yes, this trend is concerning for society, but if you're looking at this question of what do conservatives need to do to put together a winning coalition, well, they don't actually need young college-educated women, right, who tend to live in the cities and so on. So there's an issue here that I think is of interest. For Democrats, the flip is, how are they going to win back, like, these voters? How are they going to win back the working class, non-college educated? How are they going to stop hemorrhaging support among Latinos and Hispanics? And how are they going to win back the majority of people in America who are saying, we don't want open borders, we don't want woke ideology, we don't want record levels of legal migration, we don't want inflation, we don't want taxes, we don't want regulation, we want ultimately freedom. That's what this is about, cultural and economic freedom.
I'm sat here worrying whether, young men and young women, how they're going to settle down. They need to get on.
Well, it is a very, very legitimate concern, I think. Anyway, we are going to go to a break now.
Thank you
very much. We'll be back soon. This is Good Afternoon Britain.